What does the title Little Nightmares mean? Does it reference how after you die, it looks like your character has awoken from a nightmare? Is it the kids in the main story doing horrible things? Or could it be something else? What if the Little Nightmares franchise is a child's understanding of the Holocaust? Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds crazy, right? But let's look at the body of evidence from the games. Spoiler alert, just as a heads up. Also, to be clear, this is only a theory. When I first played Little Nightmares, I never really thought about the imagery in the game relating to the Holocaust. I've been reading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich to educate myself on the events of the Holocaust and to help theory craft for this video. So let's break down this theory, and by the end of the video, maybe you'll see Little Nightmares a bit differently. By the way, if you enjoyed this content, like, subscribe, or share with your friends. It really does help with the growth of this channel, and I'd really appreciate it. Okay, so how does Little Nightmares relate to the Holocaust? Just to give a brief overview of the first game, we play as Six, a young girl trapped in a massive underwater boat named the Maw. As she explores the ship, she begins to realize that the children are being harvested for food. Lured in by their gluttonous ways, hordes of guests enter the Maw to feed on children. But all the people on the boat are slaughtered by the geisha. She has mystical powers and can absorb people's life essence. The Maw itself is a prison of death for children and adults alike. Let's run this back for a second though. We have lots of Holocaust imagery in this game. Shower rooms, ovens, piles of shoes from corpses, and hiding from enemies under the floorboards. Not only this, but the game is told from a child's perspective. The Holocaust was a tragic and horrific time in human history. Unspeakable evils occurred, and the scariest part is that humans were turned into monsters. I believe Six's journey through the first game could be thought of a child experiencing the Holocaust. The entire point in both games is to hide from an evil that is clearly out in the open. Now you can make the argument that this is a coincidence, but I believe this design choice was intentful. A lot of horror games don't have their monster constantly on screen, but Little Nightmares strays from this trend. The monster is always in plain sight, which is significant in regards to the Holocaust. During this time period, racism wasn't very hidden. Propaganda helped promulgate ignorant ideologies, but a lot of discrimination was encoded. This bigotry was present at all times and out in the open, just like the enemies in Little Nightmares. Also, every monster in this game to my knowledge is human, but every creature in the game looks like a disgusting abomination. People often cope with hyper-stressful scenarios in different ways. Sometimes people can shape new perceptions of reality if the trauma they have experienced is bad enough. For a child, it makes sense that Six could have seen the horrors of the Holocaust and created this distorted sense of reality, misshapen people doing horrible things, but still, some semblance of humanity is left in their design. Surveillance is also a big theme in the game. Watching eyes, a broken mirror with a chair behind it, workers who constantly keep a lookout for stray children. The Maw could be thought of as a killing center, like one of the ones back in the Holocaust. Basically, these facilities were designed to slaughter people as quickly as possible. The Maw's design is similar in that there is only one entrance and the entire boat can submerge underwater at will. However, I don't think all of this evidence on its own is enough to build a cohesive theory, and this is where the second game comes in. For this part of the video, I want to explain how I interpret the story and break down the links to the Holocaust. In the first part of the game, we start as Mono. He is sitting next to a TV, which awakens him from a dream, which as a side note is a beautiful foreshadowing for the end of the game. Just because it's important later, I believe that Mono is a German boy and that Six is a Jewish girl living during the Holocaust. One other important thing to keep in mind is Mono keeps his mask on throughout the game, up until one point, as far as I'm aware. So it's possible the other characters can't identify him. He could be mistaken for a Jewish person as well. As we explore the outdoors, there are traps everywhere, symbolizing how much danger there was present for Jewish people during the Holocaust. Any misstep could mean death. Then we reach the house. This is where we meet the first main enemy, the Trapper. I believe he could be thought of as a regular Nazi or a hunter radicalized by propaganda. We find Six and free her from capture. There are deformed figures with human skins wrapped around them. I don't want to get into specifics too much, but human skin was one of the many brutalities of the Holocaust. Eventually things come to a climax and the two kill the Trapper. I don't think that this character adds much significance to the theory, other than to give the player an idea of the weight of the situation. But here's where the plot thickens. Once we enter the school, then we start to learn more about the universe of Little Nightmares. Mono can enter televisions by tapping into them. When he does this, we see a long cacophonous hallway with the symbol of an eye, identical to the watching eyes in both games. This is very important to the theory. I believe that in these moments, Mono is identifying with the propaganda told on the televisions. Save this thought for now, because it'll make more sense later on. Once we arrive at the school, we see an eye clock that looks similar to the ones in the game. I believe this is where the indoctrination happens for discrimination against the Jews. Well, one part of it. There is also eye imagery in other areas in the school. One important section of the game shows a kid drawing eyes in a dunce cap. I think this kid was having a hard time swallowing the propaganda, and so he was punished and forced to keep drawing eyes. Also, the classroom where the teacher instructs has a striking resemblance to Nazi classrooms. An important thing to remember for the Holocaust is there were systems of control in place. When I say systems of control, I mean that coordinated groups were working together on a shared interest to control the narrative and people's perceptions of reality. For example, during the Holocaust, perniciously designed propaganda and tactical use of misinformation helped radicalize German citizens. They began to dehumanize the Jews, oftentimes unknowingly. Burning books was also a big component of the Holocaust. It allowed Nazis to have a unified collection of knowledge instead of dissenting opinions. In the school, we can see several instances of burning books. But taking a step back for a second, what if the eyes were symbolizing a Nazi surveillance state? This imagery would make a lot of sense in the first game too. Eyes watching, always hunting its next victim. This in tandem with the systems of control makes a lot of sense. The school and media apparatus essentially teaches the citizens to hate, which is why all the enemies in the game chase anyone out of the norm. The menacing teacher looks like she's instilling fear into her students, which is also a big component of fascism. Fear is necessary in fascism because the people in power need an incentive to justify their cruelty towards others. By otherizing a group of people, fear can be created easily. Now let's take a look at the children in the classroom. It's interesting how the porcelain children have empty heads. They are rambunctious and go wild without supervision. I think this speaks to the influence of propaganda on the mind. These children sit in a classroom in which they are taught to be hateful towards another group of people. It doesn't seem like they are capable of much else. This is why whenever the students see Mono, they attack him, because it's what they've been brainwashed to do. Mono roams through the school until he is overwhelmed by enemies. He fights them off and steals one of their faces. This is one of the reasons that I believe Mono is German. When he puts on the porcelain child's face, the other kids don't attack him. But what if this scene wasn't meant literally? If Mono is German, it would make sense that he could emulate Nazi sentiment at the time, to fit in with his peers. There's also a lot of Holocaust imagery in the school section. Hiding under floorboards, organs in jars, and scenes of human experimentation are just a few. There are a few interesting tidbits of information at the school also. It seems like a child was captured and potentially tortured before we arrive. We see engravings on the wall similar to engravings in another area of the game, the area where we find Six. We also see a sheet tied up as a means of escape, which means that Six could have potentially fled the school. One final thing about the school is the chess area. In this area, we see a chessboard and a child tied to a king piece. I believe that this child was troublesome, and so the teacher used fear as a means to control her students. Most people are more incentivized to listen to information if their lives are at risk. This was also part of the reason why the Nazi regime was so powerful. They had full force of the state behind them, so those who didn't succumb to propaganda were forced into submission. As we escape the school, we get our first glimpse of the outside world. The buildings look dilapidated, almost like the images of Dresden and Nuremberg after the bombings. Wreckage and debris are everywhere. Here, Six dons her iconic yellow jacket. This scene can have two potential meanings. I think that the coat could either signify Six hiding her identity, or a way to mark her. I think both could make sense in the context of the Holocaust. Or it could be like the badges the Nazis used to identify the Jewish people. They were also coincidentally bright yellow, and I feel like it would make a lot of sense given the context of the game. The dark color palette is offset by something so easily identifiable. But then we enter one of video games' most horrifying domains, the hospital. Holy Christ, this place is horrifying. The atmosphere is palpable. In this nightmare-induced trauma land, we see lots of shower imagery and the brutality that comes with human experimentation. Many Nazis during the war experimented on Jewish people. I think the hospital represents the horror of these facilities perfectly. We see horrific amalgamations, skin hanging from walls, and the blood-chilling doctor. Mono and Six sneak around this demented hellscape while the doctor experiments on his patients. Again, we get this theming with all the other bosses. A disgusting abomination that resembles a human to some extent. I think the climax of the hospital area is probably one of the most on-the-nose references about the Holocaust. In this scene, we get revenge on the doctor's evil doings by cooking him in an oven. After we dispose of the doctor, then we go back to the outside world. In the Pale City, we avoid enemies consumed by TV. We see an ominous tower whenever we are outside, always watching. This harkens back to the idea of surveillance and control. Mono uses his powers more and more to traverse the wasteland. We can see the captivating effect that the propaganda has on the citizens in this area. They will go so far as to throw their lives away to serve an ideology on the screen. There's a scene in the game that I believe is a direct reference to the Night of Broken Glass. Mono uses a TV, and then hordes break in through a glass storefront. During the Nazi regime, many Nazis tried to escalate tensions by attacking Jewish-owned businesses. And I think in Little Nightmares, this is shown by the television being the reason that they break into the store. 6 is eventually captured by the Thin Man, the main antagonist in Little Nightmares 2. He runs the radio tower, and little is known about him other than the implication that he is behind the eyes, until it's later confirmed in the game. He also has the same power as Mono, where he can travel through televisions. Mono follows the Thin Man into the TV realm and confronts him. To my knowledge, this is the first time Mono's mask comes off, and I think it's very important. We see a chasing sequence, and 6 and Mono cross a bridge to the outside. 6 betrays Mono and leaves him behind. Then we see Mono isolated and alone. He slowly transforms into the Thin Man in a shocking plot twist. But what does the ending mean, and how does it relate to the Holocaust? Well, let me try and piece this whole thing together. What if Mono was a German boy, helping a Jewish girl? He saved 6 from capture and she unknowingly marked herself with the yellow jacket. Because she's a child, it would make sense she doesn't know the significance of the coat. Together they traveled the lands, unaware of the hatred that bred for the Jewish people. But as Mono navigated the world, he slowly became radicalized by the propaganda and systems of control in place during the Holocaust. He emulated Nazi sentiment to fit in, and used the tools at his disposal to make sense of the world. 6 abandons Mono because she found out about his change in nature. His mask was thrown off, and she left him to preserve herself. This caused him to further buy into the narrative being sold to him at the time. So much so that he began disseminating his propaganda, which inevitably created the world of Little Nightmares. His hatred created the misinformation that corrupted the world. He created institutions of the power that instilled hate like the school. He broadcasted bigoted messages through TV screens that captured watchers' minds. He established a surveillance state that meant the death for the Jews. The Maw had inspiration from the Thin Man as well. The eyes that killed the children are the same eyes on the door. These first-hand experiences, mixed with the negative coverage of another race, caused Mono to become the propagandist he fought against. I think it's also a very poignant message about systems of control. Mono is constantly fighting against the Thin Man, running from something he can't escape. This also adds a lot of meaning to the TV sequences with the hallway. No matter where Mono chooses to go, there is only one path forward for him to take given the context of his environment. I think this is a similar experience to many German citizens during this time period. With all the outside pressure, it becomes almost impossible to escape radicalization. There's a secret ending that implies that this game is a prequel, because 6 points at the Maw as her next destination. But what if the man hanging at the beginning of the first game was actually the Thin Man, or Mono from the second game? Maybe he felt so much guilt and disgust for what he helped cultivate that he killed himself. It also makes sense why 6 never uses her powers gained from the first game and gives origin to her coat. Maybe 6 feels sad and hangs onto the coat as a remnant of the past to remember the friend she lost to radicalization, thrown into the Maw, isolated and alone, which is a death camp designed to capture and kill anyone on sight. She's constantly targeted by the enemies in the Maw and eventually escapes, which could be thought of as a Jewish person escaping Auschwitz or something similar. But again, this is all a theory. I'd also like to give a big shout out to my girlfriend who helped theory craft a lot of the video. Thanks for watching. Let me know down in the comments if you think this theory makes sense, or some of your favorite theories regarding the Little Nightmares franchise thus far. I love all theories surrounding this game, and I'd love to hear your favorite ones. The cryptic storytelling in this game is amazing, and if it's about the Holocaust, it seems like a powerful medium to remind us about the powers of radicalization. Thanks so much. Have a good one.